Bom dia, gente. Vamos começar? Queria dar as boas-vindas aqui a essa mesa e é um prazer estar mediando a mesa do Ben Welsh, que é um jornalista de dados incrível. Para quem não me conhece, eu sou a Natalia Mazotte, presidente da Abraji. Sou jornalista de dados também, acabei me especializando nessa área. E o Ben tem uma experiência super interessante que ele vai compartilhar com a gente, que é a experiência mais recente dele de trabalho no Big Local News. Ele vai falar um pouquinho o que é essa iniciativa. E antes de passar a palavra para o Ben, eu queria falar um pouquinho do trabalho que ele vem realizando. Ele é um jornalista que se especializou em jornalismo de dados, tem gente que ainda chama de reportagem assistida por computador, tem gente que chama de jornalismo computacional, tem um monte de nomenclatura para todos os gostos, mas ele vem realizando esse trabalho já há mais de 10 anos e ele é cofundador de uma iniciativa chamada California Civic Data Coalition. E uma coisa interessante desse universo de jornalismo de dados é que tem muita colaboração, né? E tem muito uma mentalidade de transparência, de abertura, né? Que vem dessa ética, quase, né? Vou chamar assim, dessa ética do software livre, dos programadores, dos desenvolvedores que trabalham muito em uma lógica de colaboração e não de competição, né? A gente está sempre fazendo algum trabalho, desenvolvendo um código e bebendo da fonte do trabalho de outras pessoas e melhorando o código de outras pessoas. Então tem essa ética. E eu acho que o Ben traduz muito, de forma muito viva, essa lógica de colaboração com as iniciativas com as quais ele trabalha já há bastante tempo. Ele ficou durante muito tempo na cobertura no Los Angeles Times, implementando projetos digitais no Los Angeles Times. E agora a gente vai ouvir dele o mais recente trabalho em que ele está envolvido, que é com Big Local News, uma iniciativa da Universidade de Stanford, que está incubada na Universidade de Stanford, e de uma pessoa que também é uma grande referência nessa área, que é a Cheryl Phillips, que veio para um dos nossos congressos, para o CODA, né, que é uma conferência também especializada em dados. E o Ben vai trabalhar aqui um pouquinho da visão que eles têm para essa iniciativa, e depois a gente vai ter um tempinho para conversar com ele, para fazer perguntas. Então, se vocês tiverem questões para o Ben, já pensem aí. E no finzinho a gente vai ter, vou pedir para vocês ficarem com a gente, porque a gente vai ter o anúncio do prêmio Cláudio Weber Abramo de jornalismo de dados, tá? Que vai aí em primeira mão falar um pouquinho da abertura das inscrições, né, de como é que vai funcionar esse ano. Tá bom? Ben, it's a pleasure to have you. Please, the room is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, everybody. I'm going to torture you with a brief PowerPoint presentation of sorts. And then, she'll ask me some questions, and you can ask me whatever you want. I really want it to be a discussion. If even in my presentation there's something you really want to talk about, just shout. I'm happy to just have a conversation. I hope we can have some fun here together today. So thank you for making the time. I think Nat is the cue to bring it up, guys. Yeah.
E só enquanto começa aqui a apresentação, para quem não se sentir confortável em inglês, a gente tem tradução simultânea aqui nessa sala, tá? Então é só pegar o aparelhinho ali. O Ben vai fazer a apresentação dele em inglês. As nossas perguntas vão ser em inglês aqui, mas tem a tradução simultânea para quem precisar. Tá bom?
All right. Yeah, so this year I'm spending my time working at Stanford University on a project called Big Local News. You might ask yourself, what the heck is that? Big Local News is a group of folks at Stanford University who are trying to help journalists do more with data across the United States using kind of three main big things that we're going to cover. One is data, two is tools for working with that data, and then three are collaborations or partnerships to convert that stuff into stories and into apps and into things for our audience. The group was really created at the university there in Northern California to try to help fill a gap that we see growing in the US journalism market. I don't know if it's the same as in Brazil, but what we're seeing is as the new digital economy continues to shake out, we're seeing a concentration of talent and subscribers and money in a small number of outlets that are able to succeed by covering the widest possible area and drawing the most people in. But that's a great thing, and it's really great to see the digital model succeed. On the other side of things, in the local journalism area, there's much more economic struggles to try to keep the small news outlets that cover the mid-sized cities, like where I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, alive and have journalism still happening there. And, the type of work that I specialize in, and many others like me, and many of you, I suspect, is data journalism, which requires some specialized skills, computer programming, just a time investment, and other issues. And as those local outlets are getting smaller, they're finding it harder and harder to get the talent and time together to make data journalism stories happen. And so Big Local News was created to try to take advantage, to try to create a small dedicated team at Stanford University of faculty and students and professionals like myself who come in and out to try to build large data sets that then can be reused by outlets all across the country to do similar stories and work, and to have a focused group of people that don't get pulled into other priorities so that they can do kind of just solely this type of work. And it's funded as a nonprofit, also by the university, and we're trying to come up with an additional funding stream via a membership program, which I'll talk about a little later today. And so that's kind of the broad overview. And then now in the next few minutes, I just want to give you some examples of those different types of things, right? The data, the tools, the collaborations. Let's click over. Oh, there's all the sunny people who work there. Cheryl Phillips, who has been to this conference before, is the founder of Big Local News. She's on the faculty there. We can click to the next. And this is, I think the next one is the slide where I introduce myself, which we're a little, early for this. This used to be me before COVID. My wife calls this my Bible salesman photo, which, hey, it translates. I'm glad to hear that. All right, we hit the next one. That's me, yeah. And okay, so first is the data. So Big Local News kind of has two major initiatives related to data. One is it's just a group of people that can gather large data sets from all across the country, bring them together, and then get them and then open them up for reuse. But it's also a data portal website. If you go to biglocalnews.org, any journalist for free can sign in and have access to all the different data sets that have been pulled in, both by our team, but also by our members, because the site allows any journalist to upload data and then share it with others, both privately and publicly. And, because this is something that's done at Stanford with a lot of engineers and nerdy people involved, it's actually quite powerful in terms of how much data it can pull in and save. If people here work with data sets, you're probably familiar with this, what I call the medium data problem. We've got big data, and then we've got like your little spreadsheets. And there's great solutions for both of those things, but there's kind of this middle space of I have 10 million records or I have a few 100,000, and how do I move those files with my collaborators? How do I store them with my code so it's not a hassle? There really aren't great solutions. Like a website like GitHub has file size limits, blah, 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 blah. And so Big Local News, the website is really aiming to be a kind of tool that serves the sort of like professional data journalists to manage and move large data sets. We'll look at it a little more later, but you can not just upload it, but there's an API where you can move huge files in and out for free, which is pretty cool. And then that system is how we then publish and share a lot of the data sets that we work on with journalists. All right. So go ahead and sign up if you're interested. So here's the first example. In America, I'm probably here too, when the pandemic hit, a lot of schools closed, right? The K, we call it K-12, or, the education for young kids, right? A lot of the schools closed all across the country. And then when they reopened, there was kind of this question of, are all the kids going to come back to school? What's going to be the effect of this massive policy change of closing schools for so long? And so to try to measure that in the United States, you have this problem of that type of education in the US is run locally, right? So we have 50 states. Each state has its own system for managing primary education. Is that the same as here? Or is it, yeah. And so then if you want to find out across the whole country what happened, are kids coming back to school, et cetera, you have to go state by state and get all of the data sets and then roll them up and assemble them. And that's the kind of thing where if you were a local reporter in Missouri, you might just do your state. If you were a local reporter in California, you might just do yours. But there's really nobody who's trying to get it all, right? And this is the type of story that Big Local wants to take on, where our team partnered with journalists across the country to gather as much data as we could for as many states as we could. And you can see we didn't get them all, right? But we got enough, and a lot of the really heavily populated ones, so that we were able to then roll all that up into a big story that showed that what was called the kindergarten exodus, which is just hundreds of thousands of kids didn't come back to school when the schools reopened. And that's this now huge policy question about how the country is going to respond. And then that overall broad analysis ran as a Sunday feature story in the New York Times. And then we worked with reporters at local outlets around the country to help them do local stories about their area using the same data set. Colorado was an example where we did that. And then the data set itself is then available on the platform for anybody else who might want to use it as well. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, an example of kind of a big local news data set in a big local news story. And we try to take that approach to a lot of different other data sets. If we go to the next slide, you can see another example, which is police stops. In the United States, there's questions of bias in who the police choose to stop and search. This is a really big policy question. And policing is done by local governments again. And so Big Local News partnered with some social scientists at Stanford and others to gather as much data as we could from as many states as we could on those police stops, so that then it could be analyzed overall and made available to as many local journalists as possible. Next slide shows another example, which was that also related to crime data, which is one of our areas of focus, is the FBI rolls out a new system for how to track crime. And it turns out tens of thousands of departments aren't upgrading, and there just won't be any data from them, which is an issue. And so the Marshall Project does a story about that. We help gather the data. We make it available to journalists. And a local reporter in Los Angeles takes that data and writes a story just about LA and goes a little further than maybe this story did in burrowing into the local stuff. Another example, right? Hit the next slide. Layoff notices is another one, which we'll come back to later, where we're gathering data and figuring out when mass layoffs happen across the country. We can keep moving though. Let's pick it up. Let's pick it up. Okay, that's data. Tools is another one, right? So we work on not just gathering and creating these data sets. We also come up with tools that help making gathering it easier, help making analyzing it easier, and also help make publishing it easier. Because, one big, issue in local journalism is like, yeah, we got all this great COVID data from Johns Hopkins University that pulls it in across the country, or from the New York Times, who's putting all this effort in and they're republishing it. But most local news outlets can't actually get it on their website because there's nobody to build the cool map and put it in there, right? At a lot of these outlets. And so that's another gap that Big Local can fill. There's two quick examples of that we can see on the next couple slides. One is on, again, coronavirus, where Big Local created sort of an embeddable map that allowed you to zoom in on any state and kind of see the latest trends, right? And then that could then be, depending on what outlet wanted to use it, they could zoom in on their area and then stick it into their website the same way they would, say, a YouTube video, and boom, they're done, right? And on the next slide, you'll see another example, which was in the United States, every 10 years, we have a big census where they count everybody, and that's used for a lot of different things. But, also we were able to create a localizable thing that people could stick into their websites there too. So embeds is one example. Another are web scrapers. So web scraping is the dumb slang term for when you write computer code to pull data off the web so that you can analyze it, pull it together. And a lot of our systems, like the layoff notices I mentioned, are based on writing web scrapers for as many states as possible to try to gather it all into a single data set. And so this Warren scraper is an example of where we have graduate students, volunteer journalists across the country using open source software methods to create a sort of fleet of scrapers that can hit as many places as possible. And the tools of open source software really help make that happen. Next slide, we'll see another example, which is that API I talked about, which is making it easier to read and write into that big local data lake of stuff as possible. We have Python tools where you can just move code in and out, automatically. We have integrations with the Pandas Python library that are really cool if you're into that kind of thing, that allow very rapid movement of data. and other things like that. And those are tools we're developing as open source software from inside our group. And then the third big category of stuff that our team works on is collaborations. And that's really partnering with journalists like yourselves, not just in the United States, but around the world to try to make local journalism stories happen using the data sets we assemble or other things that you might be interested in working on too. So some quick examples of that is during COVID on the next slide, Big Local News administered a series of grants that helped fund the local journalism outlets around the world look at the impact of COVID locally for them, often focusing on, the disparities and, inequities of how coronavirus was sort of spreading. That included some partner newsrooms here in South America, looking at the effects in the Amazon and a few other places. On our website, on the blog, we have a list of kind of all 12 of those if you're interested. But it was really us trying to take the data sets that we sat on and then work with people around the world to make the stories happen. And then some of the custom data sets assembled for that were then also republished in our data portal, including one about the Amazon. A second collaboration is going by the name of CLEAN. We love our acronyms in English, and this is an effort with the University of California, Berkeley, and the ACLU and some defense lawyers networks to try to build a large database of records gathered via public records requests on local law enforcement in the U.S. California led the nation in sort of passing some reforms to the law that allowed police discipline records, misconduct, body camera video to be subject to public records law, which is potentially a really powerful source of information for investigative work. However, those requests take a lot of time and effort to pry that loose from the government because you have to ask for it to get it. And then also you can get back just voluminous amounts of information, tens of thousands of pages of PDFs, body cam video that's, totally unprocessed. And so this team is working to try to build kind of a data system that's able to sort of integrate all that stuff into one thing and make it searchable and work on techniques for developing extraction methods with computer code that can maybe, quote unquote, watch all the video and pry stuff out. And so this is one of our big new initiatives that's just kind of starting to take off right now. On the next slide, we'll see another, which is for the census. We had a partnership with the Associated Press and a lot of places to help journalists turn the census data that just like appears on a government website one day into something for their audience. On the next, we'll see, that was it. So there's other collaborations. You go to the site, you can see them, but those are just a few examples. And then another new thing at Big Local News is in addition to our funding streams, we're trying to add another, which is asking newsrooms to become members of Big Local News, which is, pay in a little bit of money to become part of our organization and then get access to extra benefits of things that are coming out of our data systems that we don't just give away for free. We're just at the very beginning of this process. We have two inaugural members, the Los Angeles Times, where I had worked, and Reuters, the wire service. And we're taking a lot of these data streams that we're developing, like, for instance, the layoff notice, and we're experimenting with turning those into notification services. So in addition to just being able to download the data or work with us, a member we'll see it on the next slide, a member will have access to a Slack bot or a Microsoft Teams bot that, when new records come in from the web scrapers on the layoff notices, they'll be the first to get instant notification of that they've arrived, which can lead to, getting the scoop, or having a leg up. And that this process has led to 6 or 8 scoops already. And it's really the kind of prototype for what we hope will be a whole set of notification systems in the future. There's a project I haven't talked about that's looking to scrape just an incredible amount of local government agendas, meeting minutes, calendars from government websites and input it into a big system. And we're planning to create a notification service for that as well that will follow this same model. And then the member newsrooms will be able to have access to it. And then the one last thing I want to say before we get to the questions is we are, of course, hiring the CLEAN project that I mentioned about building the big data lake for law enforcement records. There's going to be a job at the University of Cal at Berkeley for a data architect who can help lead that system. And so if there's someone here who would be interested in that or someone you might know, let's get them into the job, because I think could be a really cool spot for the right nerd to try to get super ambitious about mining a very important data set. So I think we're coming to the end of my slides. If you want to check them out yourself, they're at that URL or QR code. Every example that I rattled off, if you just click on the screenshot, it'll take you to it in the browser. So there's links for everything you might want in there. If there's anything you want to talk about at greater depth after the presentation, just feel free to find me. That's my email or my Twitter. I'm also right here. So yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Thank you. That's the little presentation. All right.
Ben, incredible work. And I know that we probably have here in this room the biggest concentration of nerds in this conference. And I would love to start going back in time to ask you about your beginning in data journalism, because this is a question that I receive a lot. So how did you start in data journalism? What made you get interested in this field? So I would love to hear from you.
Sure. There wasn't a plan, I can tell you that. I guess for me, the story begins when I was an undergraduate student in college in Chicago, Illinois, at DePaul University, if anybody knows DePaul. And I have to confess, I was not a very good student. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And at that point, I had zero journalism experience or ambitions. But I had a job at the university, to help pay my bills. In America, you got to work to get it. And I was answering phones. And one of my jobs, because I was so important, was to pin up notices on the bulletin board, of things happening at the university. And it just so happened that two journalists were moving there to take up a residence, and they were looking for a student assistant. And I think, I was the first person to learn about the job because it was my job to put up the notice. And while I was doing it, I remember thinking, that sounds better than this job. And there was only 2 or 3 floors below where I was. And so I just went down and applied, and they made the mistake of picking me. And so I got this great experience very early in my career, accidentally almost, of working with 2 very experienced television journalists as their assistant, booking interviews, editing tape, a lot of the really basic stuff of TV news. But they were also great investigative reporters. And so they helped me do my first public records request for legal bills for a small kind of corrupt suburb of Chicago, where they had a tip that that some connected lawyers were sort of bilking the city out of money in sort of a bit of a scam. And we filed a public records request to get all the bills so we could figure out how much money it was and who it went to and that sort of thing. And when we got it came back as one of those really, really long printouts. You guys remember when printers used to have the little tear strips on the side, and it would be one long accordion sheet. I'm showing my age here. And it came back like that, and it had all the numbers were in there, but it was, 50, 60 pages of stuff, and there were no totals or anything. And so the question was, how are we going to add all this up? How are we going to figure out the story? And honestly, I said, well, maybe we could do a spreadsheet. I had never done one before. And so I just, sat there and typed them all into a spreadsheet and then figured out how to add it all up. And that number ran on the news. And the anchor, climbed a ladder and dropped the paper down to kind of make fun of the whole situation. And I was kind of hooked right then. I saw right away that what I saw was that, one, the data work is what made the story special. It made it more than just like the regular story. It allowed us to do something bigger and more direct that I found exciting. And I also saw in that if I'm the guy who figures out the dumb tech thing, that's kind of like my way in. It's like my little angle. It's a way to go straight towards doing that more ambitious analytical work. And it's just like a way for me into the field. And I liked it too. And so I just, followed that thread. I went to graduate school at the University of Missouri and took part in a program that really focused on teaching journalists these skills. That really helped. And I just kept following that thread, and I got lucky, and it really worked out for me. But it all started with that one cool story that got me gassed up,
And from this moment, when you had to kind of like manually, probably
Yes.
fill out a spreadsheet, to these days, what for you was the most interesting piece of work that you did with data journalism?
I don't know. I mean, to me, it's always ones like that where I feel like we're doing a story that would not otherwise be done. You know, to me, I think that really, you know, you can get kind of like, it's fun to do machine learning or like make a cool website or like the technical part of it I do enjoy and really like. But I do think the most fulfilling data journalism is when it allows you to find a story that you wouldn't have found or that others hadn't found and then tell that. And to me, the thing that's even a level beyond that in terms of just like fulfillment or excitement is when you find that the statistical or more higher level view that you can bring to data helps bring some sense of order or meaning to the subjects of the story. You know, there's a way in which, like, you know, I started some stories about the 911 emergency response system in Los Angeles. You know, the dial the phone and the ambulance comes. And there was a lot of talk around City Hall about problems in the system. And that's kind of what got us going on it. But when we really ran the numbers and listened to the data and let the statistics lead us a little bit, we actually found problems in the system that nobody was talking about and that had been totally overlooked, right? So it's a story that was being missed. But then we used that data to go knock on doors and talk to people who were on the other end of some of those problems. And for those people, you really saw that this was one of the most traumatic days or experiences of their life, and it had really gone wrong. And they had no way of really understanding why or how it was connected to anything bigger. And then you see from them that you're able to help them see a story in it or some greater meaning or connection to a system in it that is a rewarding, not rewarding, but it sort of, you know, helps them process, you know, the stuff. And to me, when you can get to that level, that just the whole thing is great. And then it led to reforms in the system, which is also really good. And like, so to me, it's that strange, almost spiritual process of statistics revealing the truth to you and to others, I guess, if that makes any sense.
And I love when I have like an experienced journalist who works with data to ask this question: how do you bulletproof your data work? Because this is something that is really like the source of fear for most of data journalists. Did I get it right? Did I mess up with some of the numbers? How do you bulletproof your work?
Yeah, there's a lot of tricks to it, you know, and it can kind of depend on what you're trying to report. But to me, one way I often think about it is internal consistency versus external consistency, which is like, can I come up with mathematical tests against the data that ought to be true if the data is what I think it is? And so that's things just like summing up columns and fields to make sure that things connect or add up like I think internally. But then also finding, you know, let's say I'm analyzing the 911 system and I'm looking for something very particular about a problem in it. But separately, the government puts out annual reports with just like boring totals about the same database that is part of just their like operation of the system. I say to myself, well, if I really understand this database and if I really have all the records, I should be able to recreate the totals that are being published in these outside reports. And to me, that's like an example of seeking external consistency, someone else's analysis that I can hit. And if I can do that, then I gather confidence about what I'm doing. Also, ground truthing it against the real world. So in the case of this 911 story, again, it's like, well, based on my analysis, this type of call is a problem, and here's like 50 bad examples from the last few years. If what I think is true, that one, these were bad calls, and two, it actually mattered, I can make a prediction like a scientist. If I go knock on these doors, I'm going to get some bad, it's going to be bad, right? Or what I should be able to test it against people's experience. And so it's just taking the actual individual cases out against like the real world, I think is always really powerful. And it will often really inform what you do with it afterwards as well. What's another trick?
Any statistical trick?
like hitting outside totals, I think is really big. You have to sourcing up the people who created the data. If you're like, one type of data journalism is kind of forensic, where you get a government data set and then you're trying to analyze it. And there's this sort of detective work of trying to figure out what is this column, what is this field. I mean, there are human beings who created these systems, and if you find them, you can just interview them about how the database works. And you're never going to quote them, and you can just tell them that. But you really, sources like that are often really helpful. And then if it's something contentious, I will often really take my analysis, as boring as it is, to the subject of the story. So like a different story I did was about a helicopter company in California that makes the world's most popular helicopter. And our analysis was showing that there's a lot of accidents, that there are problems with the helicopter. And we knew that the company was going to contest this, maybe even in a technical way. And so I really wrote what was effectively like a memo with how we did the analysis, like all the steps we did, like the really boring stuff. I downloaded this database, I filtered this field, all that stuff. And all that went to the source ahead of time if they wanted to look at it, including my code. And then there was a government analysis I was recreating from decades ago. And I call up the people who work at the government. I'm like, look, we're going to get on the phone and I'm going to walk through this and you're going to tell me if I screwed it up. And then at least you have, and you can write into the story that people had the ability to review it ahead of time.
And so going to your presentation and the project, I really love this project. I think it's amazing because you tackle two issues here. You tackle the lack of data for local journalists, and you also tackle the lack of skills because you provide the tools to make the work easier for them. And I wonder what for you is the biggest challenge today in data journalism in the US? And I can tell you a bit about Brazil, but is it the lack of data, or is it the lack of human resources specialized in dealing with the data?
To be honest, I'm really positive. I'm a rare person in journalism. I feel really good about it, to be honest with you. I think that data journalism continues to rise and is just doing incredible. I really think in the coronavirus story, as tragic as it was and as awful as the pandemic was, I would never want to repeat it. But the truth is, in my opinion, is that data journalists rose to one of the biggest stories of their lifetimes. They were at the center of the coverage. The coronavirus trackers and data analysis tools in the US, and I bet here in Brazil too, were among the most popular things that with the audience. And I really think we saw, in my opinion, the culmination of 2 or 3 decades of kind of digital app building experimentation, of going direct to the audience with the data, of making the data the heart of news stories and coverage. I really think we saw the culmination of that in the coronavirus story. You saw the New York Times team that did their work win the Pulitzer for public service. And so I really think we kind of hit like a peak, just in the last couple of years in these very depressing times, but it's true. And I think we've also seen a lot of the formats that have been experimented with. What are apps and trackers and visual stories that stand alone, and all these different types of new internet first kind of data story forms have really become almost like assembly lines in a lot of the big newsrooms, in the way that a front page story has an assembly line or a nightly news package has an assembly line. And that's awesome. I just think we're kind of out of a boutique experimentation phase of data journalism, and we're into like the industrial era where we can churn these out. Now, and I think I'm just so proud of our whole movement that's really pulled that off. And it proves we were right the whole time. But there are problems. Like I think the economic model's a problem. We're seeing this consolidation. And so you have some very, very large, incredibly successful teams that are just getting bigger and bigger. And it's in the local areas, in the US at least, that there just isn't the money and to pay for creating all this stuff at the local level. In the US, we're seeing a lot of consolidation of local news, or small or large chains own almost all of the small newspapers, and they're really struggling on their commercial model. There's some bad news on that this week if you followed the Gannett company. And so I think that the problem we're going to see is that the local papers are just going to continue to feel the crunch. And I think the challenge for us as data journalists is to keep doing what we're doing, which is being part of the solution to the digital business problem, which is creating stuff that our audience wants to pay for on the internet. And I think if we keep our eyes on that, we have the formula. We just have to execute.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because in order to do that, you need not only the technical skills, but you also need like a kind of like product mindset.
Yes.
So and like here in Brazil, we've been seeing the data journalism movement flourishing for the past 10 to 15 years, thanks to organizations like Abraji, School of Data, like that provide training for journalists. But I think we are now in this phase of like seeing product mindset being something teachable or important to be in this, to have this centrality. And I don't know how it is in the US. Do you see like the product movement building upon the data journalism movement?
There definitely is an overlap. Some of the people I looked up to when I got into this 20 years ago just became product people. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they've kind of moved into more of the kind of software focused work and the audience and developing for the business. I think we need to see more and more of it. You know what I mean? I think as journalists, we can't be afraid of that. Because at least in the United States, there's a more traditional attitude of the separation between church and state, as we might say, or sometimes in investigative reporting, you can kind of be cool by not caring about the audience. You know what I mean? There's like a way in which that kind of spotlight attitude can sometimes encourage what I think is an approach that will sink us, that will, at least in the US, the government's not going to save us. You know what I mean? Like, we need to reinvent what we're doing so that people want to pay for it on the web. And to be honest with you, that's on everybody top to bottom inside a legacy news organization like the LA Times or newspaper to help try to make that change happen. And that's tough. And none of us would choose to do it. And it's not like my dream, but it's like, it's part of getting through this. I just think we have to,
And being digitally driven is kind of expensive because you need to have technology. You need to have human resources that are specialized, but you need to have also the technology built.
Skills. We have to have the human capital of people who know how to code, who know how to think about the audience and product in a structured way using analytics, that have the time to focus on those things. And that's where I think groups like Abraji or other groups in the US are so important at helping more people have access to that knowledge and those skills. Because the talent pool that we're going for is small, and they can make 2, 3, 4 times more money at Netflix or Google or your other sponsors for your event, pay exorbitant amounts of money for people that are just beginning to become computer programmers, really, to try to develop them into that. And I don't think we're ever going to be able to compete with them salary-wise, but we have a much stronger call to mission. And I think through open source software, through conferences and mid-career training for journalists, through things that are alternatives to at least America's expensive higher education system, we can create more and more people who have these skills. Because the truth is programming's not that hard. I mean, it's not, you can't wake up tomorrow, but it's really, a couple dozen discrete skills that you have to learn how to do those couple dozen things. You have to learn how to put them together to solve problems, and then and how to be creative, and like that process, anybody in this room could learn. Many of you probably already have. And I think that, we can increase the pie or the pool of people who know how to do this and make it so that we have a broader group of talent. And I see it happening in the US. A lot of journalism schools have gotten much more focused on teaching this stuff. So when I went to graduate school 20 years ago, really there was only 1 or 2 places that tried to teach it, and now there's dozens. And I think we just got to keep moving in that direction so that we create a pipeline of people that have these talents, and we make it accessible to as many people as possible.
Yeah, so here in Brazil, we also see this movement. We have graduate courses that teach data journalism. I have few students here. And I think like projects like Big Local News are really important to kind of bringing this knowledge and resources to local news. And I wonder for you, what is the role of automation? Because here, I think I mentioned this to you yesterday. We had a very interesting project. So in Brazil, we have 5,570 municipalities. And I think you checked the number. But here, it's really hard to make some national coverages when you have local stories. And one of our main outlets, media outlets here, G1, made an automation to bring the coverage of the election results from all the municipalities in Brazil. And I wonder if, like in big local news, you see automation as a way to also improve the use of data journalism within local news.
Yes, of course, totally. And that model that you just sketched out, I think, is a winning model in the U.S. and in Brazil and so many other places where, you need to gather data from all 50 states or California's 58 counties. You come up with a system, scrapers, whatever, downloaders that grab it and pull it all in. And we saw that happen with the coronavirus story as well. And I think it can be applied to so many other things. I also think that advances in technology are making it easier and easier to do. A lot of the code management tools like GitHub now have built into it kind of automatic task running systems, so that actually for free with open source software, you can stick your little web scraper or downloader into the code repository and it will run on a schedule for you and update it into the system. At the LA Times, our coronavirus scraping thing was pulling from hundreds of different data sources and writing them all into data files that went into our tracker and running dozens and dozens of tasks each day to do that. And we did it entirely for free at zero cost because we did it via the GitHub open source kind of actions system for pulling all those things in. And I think that as the cost of running those automation things comes down, by embracing open source methods and those systems, you can do it for very inexpensive cost. And with something like Big Local, where it's open and we're seeking contributions, you can benefit from the skills and time of people outside of our group. So the case of our WARN layoff scraping system, which is along that model, it now covers 39 U.S. states. And more than a dozen of them were done by people outside of Big Local who volunteered and contributed to the project. And then we maintain it and put in time to help it keep running, which you need to have, like any open source project. But we're, at a much lower cost than one newsroom trying to go it alone. I think election results is a great example of that too.
And so here, you mentioned the pandemic as a tipping point for data journalism, and I believe it was. And here in Brazil, we had an initiative that kind of changed the mindset of journalists in terms of collaboration. That was really incredible. So here in our health system, the data is concentrated in the federal level because we have a federal health system. And I know it is different in the US, yes, like famously different. But at some point in the middle of the pandemic, our president decided that they wouldn't be releasing timely the results. So a lot of news outlets started to collaborate to pull the data from the states to have the view for the country in a timely manner. And I don't know if you have any example in the US where you saw this kind of collaboration to tackle the lack of data. So coming from the local to yes, the federal level.
We did something similar in California. So California has 58 counties, and our public health system is actually split. They're independent, all 58. There's actually 2 cities that have their own, so there's actually technically 60. But but when the pandemic first happened, the state government of California and then also the U.S. federal government, it's not that they didn't want to, they were just unable to rapidly pull all the information together because they just weren't really trying. They didn't really have a system for consolidating the data up from the lower level. And the media filled that gap. So in our case at the LA Times, we partnered with the San Francisco Chronicle, with Stanford, with public radio stations in the state. And we built kind of the first version of our coronavirus tracking thing where we would go to all 60 websites every day and pull in the data. And then we gradually wrote scrapers to pull it in automatically. And then before long, it didn't require as much human time. But in that first moment of how do we pull it all together, it was by collaborating that we were actually able to get it done. And I think in our case, it really couldn't have been done any other way because of the kind of local news issues in the US. Like none of us had the staff to really pull it off individually. But if we did it together, you know, it was doable. And it's just many hands make light work is one of our little idioms. And like, I think that was an example. And I think there's going to be a lot of that. And I also think in your story, you see the power of us doing this in a way, the importance where the president himself found it threatening. You know what I mean? It just shows you that the data work, which I think looked at one way might seem sort of clerical or whatever, is actually really ultimately culminates in something that is just really, really important and newsworthy. And we should embrace those challenges, as our mission.
Okay, we still have like around half an hour, and I wonder if we have questions from our audience. Quem tiver alguma pergunta para o Ben, a gente abre aqui o espaço para conversa. And then if you want to put this...
This is the translation?
Yeah, the translation. Aí podem fazer a pergunta em português, que ele vai ouvir aqui a tradução, não tem problema.
Português?
Uhum.
Se essa iniciativa ela é destinada apenas às redações ou a jornalistas independentes e a freelancers jornalistas também, na Big News?
Big Local News is free to any journalist who wants to use it. You can go and sign into the website right now and make an account. The data sets are all free. It will remain that way. Working with us is free. The tools are all open source and free. The idea of the membership program is to try to have some additional things beyond that baseline that members would get for becoming members. And right now we're doing notification services. I think in the future that might include some search tools and just a few things that aren't freely available. But our goal is to make as much free as possible. And the membership program is an experiment to try to help make things more sustainable, is really the idea.
Hi, my name is Pedro. Do you consider that those tools, they're dependent on having universities interested in building it or academic interest? And how would you believe to replicate it without it?
I didn't hear the beginning of your question, so forgive me. But you asked if academics are interested in using the data?
No, if those tools, they are dependent on having academics interested in developing it.
In
if
our
we
case,
could build it without it.
Yes, all the things that Big Local News is building, could be done independently. It's just a matter of who has the time, to do it. And so I think there are a few things that have been done that are more academic in nature that I don't think the journalists would be qualified to do. So like, for instance, the police data project about the stops was converted into some pretty high level academic papers. We partnered with Sharad Goel, who developed kind of a statistical test for identifying bias. And then, so he brought that sort of theory and intellectual heft to helping structure how you investigate the data. And then we work with journalists to execute the test. So the test has to do with what time of day people are stopped, day or night, and then the success rate of the searches. So, theoretically, if you're being stopped because you're suspicious, because there's probable cause, they ought to be finding things at a pretty high percentage, right? If there's clues. And if they're not, and you then integrate the racial categories on top of that, you can show, in some cases, evidence of bias where people are stopped at a higher rate, but stuff is found at a lower rate, right? And so there's this statistical test that helps evaluate that probably we couldn't have come up with. The academic did, established it. But then we've partnered, and the LA Times and other outlets have used the data and that method as part of their reporting, and it's been published in their stories. And so I think that's that. I think with the future police work, we were looking at digging into these huge pools of data. I think we're going to rely on some academics at the Berkeley Data Science School to help us come up with better, mathematical things to kind of, ping the data with, to help search through and identify things worth reviewing in body cam footage and things like that are just kind of higher level, stuff, you know. I think journalists could do it if they were smart and they put the time in, but they're not. That's not where they start, you know. Yeah.
I wanted to know what are your goals with your project? You want to expand to other countries, other universities? What's the dream?
Well, our goal is to find sustainability. You know what I mean? We really want to play out what I think we all feel on the team is what we think is a good idea. Like we see this gap in news where there just isn't the skills and talent and time. We see the opportunity of how data allows you to like kind of fill those gaps, and we want to see if we can make it work. You know, so I think really fundamentally the goal is, can we create a sort of a miniature institution that solves this problem and is sustainable? You know, I think that's really the goal in sort of a very California startup mindset, I guess, is can we prove the concept, right? And if we can prove the concept, I don't see why it couldn't be applied to other areas of the world that have the same challenges, you know what I mean? Or the same fundamental, you know, orientation of their media. And so, yeah, I mean, if we're right and it works, let's do other countries, totally. And we've already done partnerships with people here in Brazil and elsewhere. And as part of what we're doing now, we would welcome doing more of that. And so if people are interested, let's talk.
Hi, Patrick Butler with the International Center for Journalists. I wanted to ask you, and I joined a little late, so I hope this wasn't something you already talked about, but one thing that Brazil and the United States have in common is upcoming elections, where there is questions about voting integrity, and really the future of our democracies in both cases. So I wondered how you're approaching that from a data standpoint. How could the project be useful in looking at data in elections?
I think an idea that came up earlier, which is working with election results data to just make it easier and smoother, is one very like bread and butter kind of fundamental thing. You know, what we've seen in the United States is, you know, during the pandemic, and I think increasingly in the future, more and more people are voting by mail, which is ultimately resulting in a lot of votes being counted after Election Day. So the new normal in the US, and maybe here too, I don't know, is that we don't really find out the winners or get the finished count until days or sometimes a week or more after Election Day. And that's created this kind of chaotic period in American politics about like who's the winner and what is the public supposed to think about dumps of votes that get counted a few days after the election. And that phenomenon was really at the heart of some of the disputes about our last presidential election when you really get into what it is. And I think that there's just inefficiencies in the America's really fragmented way of counting the vote and in how that's communicated to the public that contribute to confusion or create a space for people who want to be dishonest to start spinning stories. And so I think by getting more efficient, more unified, and clearer about communicating election results, we can just help be the referees in those situations. And so I think it's working together on software systems that download the data from all the places and put it together. Working together, we see this in the US, working together on models that help forecast or estimate how many outstanding votes there are that aren't counted. You know what I mean? So that we can communicate to the audience, here's where we think the vote is in those moments. Because the government doesn't have an estimate, you know? So there's a way in which, you know, if someone is a skeptical reader, there often isn't an official answer, you know what I mean, about how many votes there are still to count or where we are in that process. Being the voices of reason and numeracy within our newsrooms about how to manage those moments and shifting how coverage works to help give readers a fair expectation of what's coming and happening. I think involves journalists across the country gaining more literacy about this. And so I think, you know, there's all that needs to happen. I think Big Local's role is maybe in the kind of how can we write the code to get the results faster and bring it together kind of part of it. But I'm sure there's other things as well.
Just to give you a bit of context, here in Brazil, we have electronic bailouts. How do you call it? And the problem is that people kind of question the integrity of the electronic system.
They might think it's hacked or something like that?
Yeah. It's auditable, and like a lot of tests had been done, but even though
So do you get the full results on the night of the election?
Yes. Yes, pretty much.
Wow. Civilization.
Mais perguntas?
Hi, this is Gisela from the Investigative Reporting Program. This is amazing. Thank you so much for the presentation. I kind of wanted to go back to a little bit more of a quote, quote, basic question, which is, how do you storify big data sets? Like, what are some of the tips to storify? Okay, I have a huge data set. And then how do you pick which data sets to work on? Let's say you just published your big project. Your big data project just published and you have to pick a new one. There's so many data sets in the world that, like, what do you look for in a data set that it's not only newsworthy, but also storyfiable and then how you approach that from a technical perspective?
Yeah. I mean, there's different approaches, but one technique that I find I come back to again and again is finding outside standards that you can measure and judge your subject against. You know, because you can have, like, I can have the data on the 911 emergency response system, right? And I can analyze it and know how fast all the different segments take and all this stuff nobody really knows. But can I say whether they're doing a good job or doing a bad job? Can I say whether things are going right or going wrong just with those numbers? Well, I can, but then my story says, Ben says the system's too slow. Well, you can't put that on the front page. That's just like my opinion, man, you know? But by finding an outside standard to judge the data against, I can create measurements that are then, you know, more defensible and, you know, justifiable as news. And so in that case, it was, well, there's a National Association of Fire Chiefs, of which our department is a member, and they've created standards for performance that they're expected to hit. And they're not really publicized. The city government never looks at them, but they're there. And so if I take the data and I measure the local department against those standards, right, I can then report on the gaps or where things are falling short. And it's by finding that outside standard in not just that story, but so many other stories, you can often set yourself up for success or kind of having something to say. And it doesn't have to be a numerical thing. It can be like a law, or it can be a promise that a politician made. They, you know, like I did a story with my students at DePaul this year where a previous mayor had promised to plant 1 million trees, right? We're going to plant 1 million trees. Well, how many did they end up planting? It's been 15 years, right? And then you get the data and you can say, well, they only planted this many, you know? Another way, and this is increasingly common in the US, which I think is good, is looking at equity as your standard, or fairness, or, you know, distribution. And so there's a sense of, like, a lot of our public systems are, you know, intended to reach everyone or to be available, you know, have impact on all groups. And if you take your data and you analyze, well, what's the results of this system for one group of people versus another, you can then have kind of a standard of equity, or how you might frame that might vary depending on the story, that you can then use to measure it against. So to me, it's like, what am I measuring against? And how can I defend that? Is almost always how I think about bringing storifying or bringing accountability. Other techniques that are not about the investigative part, but that are often helpful, is how are you going to connect this to real people or the other end of the system? And I often will ask myself, is my story about a central tendency? Is it about the average? Or is it about an outlier? Is it about people on the fringes of the data set? And then I'll use the data set to try to identify people that are in those different, either one of those two groups. I call them, this is maybe not a politically correct phrasing anymore, but I will call them Mr. and Mrs. Outlier or Mr. and Mrs. Central Tendency. And that's kind of, in my mind, the imaginary people that I'm often looking for to then bring the story to life. And then the data leads you to the people, which often just makes it a much more vibrant and fulfilling story. You had a second question. I'm sorry, I forgot it.
Technically, how do you approach looking for a story in big data sets? Like, what are your steps?
That, like that, you know, like what, you know, central tendency, outlier. I'm coming up with questions that I can answer. You know, so like to me, I'll find the standard, and then the question is, did they live up to that standard? Or I'll just have things I want to know as a reporter, and I will literally just write questions. I'll just puke them, just like you're preparing for an interview. And then I try to write the code or come up with the trick that's going to try to help me answer those questions. And then I just try to go through that process again and again. And I think of it as interviewing the data, really. And oftentimes it takes lots and lots of work to get to that point of acquiring it and cleaning it and all these other things you guys know about. But that to me is a big part of it.
Eu tenho uma pergunta aqui, Natália.
Onde?
Mas eu vou voltar para o português. Então, Ben, então eu queria saber um pouco da parte da qualificação dos jornalistas que estão nos Estados Unidos. Você provavelmente é um ponto fora da curva, né? Que programa bastante. A maioria das pessoas lá, elas já têm um interesse em programação. As pessoas, que tipo de ferramentas elas costumam usar e como isso impacta o dia delas e como você vê isso, por exemplo, no seu ambiente de trabalho mesmo. E se houve alguma mudança, por exemplo, as faculdades lá, ou mesmo quando você foi estudante, elas já ensinavam alguma coisa relacionada à estatística, relacionada à programação, ou você mesmo correu atrás disso tudo depois? Obrigada.
I mean, we're seeing more and more teaching. I think especially at the graduate school level, there's now, I don't know how many, you could count it and do a story, but I think there's probably, 10 to 20 graduate programs that pretty much in the US that teach that you get a degree in data journalism. And I think that's awesome. That's great. I think they're really intended to create specialists. I think that I guess I'm probably an example of a specialist type, someone who's primarily doing the data work almost all day, every day. And that is now that's not like a job. It's like one of my really boring things I'm proud I accomplished as a manager is we got a job classification written into our guild contract for a data and graphics journalist. That's like a thing now that's in there the same way a photographer is, or, another specialized job class. And so I really do think we've seen the formalization of that. I think the graduate schools help. But I also think there's a lot of other journalists who will never become specialists who do data journalism and are often very, very good at it. And for them, I think it's the spreadsheet, Excel, some pivot tables might be as fancy as it gets, but you can get a long way doing that. You know what I mean? And I think that that's where it really begins. And I think that that's the fundamental skill. And I would say in the LA Times newsroom, there's probably of the non-specialists, of the quote regular reporters, there's probably 10 to 20 that are really good with the spreadsheet and don't need any help and just do it themselves. That's great. I'm for it. And I think part of it happening is not feeling like all that needs to go through you, the data editor, or there has to be necessarily whatever, but it's a more diffuse skill that is just all across the newsroom and people are just popping out data stuff everywhere. And you see it more and more.
Hi, Ben. Here, my name is Breno. I love the presentation, love the project. But my question is about here in this Congress and Brazilian journalism. We talk a lot about humanizing and bringing stories, and I really believe in data journalism and numbers, but I also believe in humanizing the story and bringing characters to what you're talking about. And I was wondering what you think about maybe a parallel project of this big data project. Gathering around stories, gathering around characters, people who have something to say. And is there a way to organize this and bring this to this organization model, national level? Someone that needs a character from from California, and they find someone that can talk about this in New York. Is there a way to organize this and bring it to a human level more than a data level?
You mean like a source network almost, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is, my memory is a little foggy, but there actually was an effort to do something like that, to try to kind of create a network of people who want to participate in news stories. I know there's a lot of things like that at the expert level, people kind of gathering directories and connecting experts for stories. At the more just normal person level, I don't know. It would be a big undertaking. I think it's pretty interesting. I've seen success at that in very narrowly designed topic areas. So for instance, ProPublica's done quite a bit of work building Facebook groups. They've done stories about medical devices having problems, or kind of limited run kind of story topics. And then they create social media spaces, some of them private, where they try to assemble sort of quote unquote regular people who are connected to it, both to share the stories so they can read them, but also to gather information with them. And they've experimented with even questionnaires and surveying those groups to help them get story ideas, to test out tips and story ideas. And I do think it's there. I think it's in that world of what we're now calling engagement in the United States, which I think is a really exciting space in news, and is really just kind of emerging as data journalism is. I'd welcome it. I think it's probably beyond what we can accomplish in our little team, but it sounds, let's do it.
Aqui no meio tem uma pergunta também.
Hi. I would like to know for you what's the best solution for big media outlets, because here in Brazil we have some like 5 or 6 that are more present in the country. Do you think it's better for these media outlets to have a group specialized in data journalism, or do you think it's better like to have more people in different positions doing it and knowing how to do data journalism?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that does vary from newsroom to newsroom, is kind of the model, right? Like, how is the team set up within the newsroom? And I think you really well described kind of 2 competing ways of doing it, which is, do you have the one centralized team, the data and graphics department, and they partner with other desks or do their own thing, and or do you have data reporters in all the desks with maybe one editor they talk to distributed? And I think both of those models work. You know what I mean? I don't think one is right and the other is wrong, but they do have, like, say, strengths and weaknesses. I think that the distributed model, which is the more traditional newspaper model, really works well when you have highly experienced data journalists who can work independently, who can kind of be peers of the people they're with on the desks. And then they're allowed to just focus on, like, really successful, high impact data journalism work, like someone like a Nate Cohen at the New York Times who just does polling stuff, or someone like that. That can really, really work well because they can have like a beat, you know what I mean? And they can really be plugged into it. That model isn't as good at trying to do things that aren't on the agenda of the newsroom, the traditional newsroom, especially like in a legacy news organization. Like, say, make a coronavirus tracker, like making apps that go directly to the audience, doing very visual pieces that wouldn't get assigned or edited through a traditional desk. Those are more difficult to do in the distributed model. In the consolidated model, you can have a team that just does that and they just kind of do it, And so I think that it kind of depends which of those 2 things you want to do. But if you look at a place like the Washington Post, they actually have both. And I think it's for that reason, whether they mean it explicitly or not, is that the distributed team is kind of doing better at the beat reporting and the news coverage like stuff, and the consolidated team does more engineering and data grinding and stuff that wouldn't come through a traditional desk. And so I think I think you should have both, I guess, is the answer to your question. I do think that in a smaller newsroom, the consolidated team is probably the way to go. Like, if you're a smaller newsroom, 2 or 3 people who just do this stuff and who would do your coronavirus tracker or your live election results on election night, I do think that's the answer, because the consolidated model is just not going to be able to do that in most cases, or the decentralized model.
Do you envision a moment in time where we are going to have newsrooms with all the journalists knowing how to deal with data? Because sometimes I feel there is almost a rivalry between like what we call traditional journalism and data journalism, and which is interesting. Sometimes I hear from people, like from journalists, oh, but we deal with data since forever. It doesn't make any sense. You guys are trying to make a whole field around data, and this is part of the journalism work since forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think the frankly, the numbers speak for themselves, which is that the audience wants the data products. The audience also wants long-form stories and great writing, and I want that too as a reader, you know what I mean? But the audience wants what we're making. It's not a debate, you know what I mean? Like, it's settled. And this is what I think is one of the great things about the success of the coronavirus story for us, is It's the business side people, the money people who run the newsrooms are like, how do we get more of this? And that's just a sign that we have momentum and the question's answered. I think that just means that we have another product. Your legacy newsroom is like a factory, right? That had all these assembly lines that, if we're frank, were really developed in the 1850s and 60s and maybe retooled in the 70s and 80s of 1900s. And now we are putting new assembly lines into that same building that create these other products. And to do that, we need different skills and different workflows and different attitudes. And it's happening, and I think that doesn't mean there isn't a place for the other thing. There really is a place. Honestly, I think the numbers also show that readers really want long, in-depth, beautifully written stories. Like, there's a great case for that too. It's not a zero-sum thing. I really honestly feel optimistic about all that. And so we just need to embrace the non-zero, I'm getting really numbery, sorry, but we need to embrace the non-zero sort of synergistic, truth of it, which is that we grow together,
Ben, I'm going to wrap up with you because we have the announcement of our National Data Journalism Prize. And I want to thank you for sharing with us all of your experiences. It's great to hear from you. Pessoal, a gente vai ter o anúncio agora do prêmio Cláudio Weber Abramo de Jornalismo de Dados. Primeiro eu queria pedir uma salva de palmas para o Ben.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. I'll be around the conference the next 2 days. I'll have my California flag out if you guys want to write. I'll be writing some Python, and so if you want to hack on anything, you got a programming problem you need help with, you just want to talk or whatever, just interrupt me, please.
Aproveitem aí a presença do Ben. E eu queria chamar a Fernanda Campagnucci, que é diretora executiva da Open Knowledge, para falar do prêmio Cláudio Weber Abramo.
Olá, pessoal. Bom dia, quase boa tarde. É um anúncio rápido aqui, né, para o público que já conhece. Essa é a 4ª edição do prêmio Cláudio Weber Abramo de Jornalismo de Dados, um prêmio especializado, né? A gente já teve nas edições precedentes 340 trabalhos e no site vocês encontram prêmio.jornalismodedados.org o regulamento, né? As inscrições estão sendo abertas hoje. É uma iniciativa da Escola de Dados da Open Knowledge Brasil em parceria com a Abraji e a Transparência Brasil, né? São 4 categorias. Tem a categoria de experimentação e inovação, investigação, né, com uso de dados, visualização de dados e a categoria de dados abertos, que esse ano tem uma novidade, que vai contemplar não só trabalhos de veículos jornalísticos, mas também trabalho de organizações que fazem conteúdo de caráter jornalístico, né? Tanto usando dados quanto usando códigos abertos, né? Produzindo e compartilhando o código. Então, tá lá, né? Nesse site vocês veem também os trabalhos anteriores nessa galeria das edições anteriores, né? Então, ao se inscrever, você também autoriza o seu trabalho a ficar nessa galeria, né? E compartilhar, dar visibilidade também ao trabalho. E os vencedores vão ser anunciados durante a conferência de Jornalismo de Dados e Métodos Digitais, que é o CODA-BR, que vai acontecer nos dias 5 e 6 de novembro. Então, já anotem na agenda, né? A cerimônia de entrega dos prêmios vai ser no dia 6, mas durante os dias 5 e 6 a gente vai ter a já tradicional conferência na ESPM aqui em São Paulo. Então, é isso, prêmio.jornalismodedados.org. A gente aguarda os trabalhos de vocês lá e pede que ajudem também a divulgar por aí nas suas redes. Muito obrigada.